Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend at my late uncle's lake cabin. Fresh air, no neighbors, no drama. Instead, I found a $750 fine, a forged HOA notice, and strangers sipping wine in my house. By Thursday, they'd claimed my cabin. By Friday, I was ready for war. The first weekend at my late uncle's cabin on Hayden Lake was supposed to be quiet. Peaceful, a reset. After a burnout stretch consulting on an off-grid housing project in Arizona, I'd finally driven up through the winding roads of Montana pine country and parked at the old gate just past dusk, expecting silence and trees and the smell of cedar. I got all that, and something else. Saturday morning, the light came in soft and gold off the lake. I stepped onto the porch with coffee, barefoot, and took it all in. The place hadn't changed much since I was a kid. The cabin was simple but solid. Hand-hewn logs, stone chimney, a wraparound porch with a creaking swing that still hung at a lazy angle. It was mine now. No mortgage, no neighbors peering over the fence, no HOA. That last bit had been part of the appeal, confirmed by the deed, title, and 2 separate legal reviews before the probate cleared. That's why the envelope zip-tied to my gate made exactly 0 cents. It was printed on glossy letterhead. Crescent Ridge HOA. The wording was the kind of corporate paranoid legalese I used to laugh at during compliance audits. Pursuant to the owner visitation schedule outlined in Resolution 48G, this property is designated a quiet rest zone on Thursdays and must remain unoccupied during that time. I stood there, rereading that sentence 3 times like it might stop being insane. Below the warning, a bold red-stamped first violation followed by an alleged fine of $750. The signature at the bottom read, Karen Sharp, President, Crescent Ridge HOA. I looked out across the lake toward the opposite shore, where the so-called Crescent Ridge community sat tucked behind a private gate and the kind of hedges you only plant when you're hiding something. It was a cookie-cutter enclave of modern mansions and soulless landscaping, barely a mile away as the crow flies, but on paper, in every legal sense, a different world. Back inside, I pulled up my title records. The parcel was crystal clear. Private property, no encumbrances, no servitudes, not within any HOA jurisdiction. I wasn't part of anything. There was no owner visitation schedule, no Resolution 48G. The cabin wasn't just out of reach. It wasn't even on the HOA's damn map. But the gall, the entitlement, the smug assumption that they could dictate anything to me on my land. I wrote it off as a mistake, maybe some paperwork screw-up. That kind of thing happens, right? Crossed wires, overzealous clipboard types. I figured I'd nip it in the bud. I called the number listed at the bottom of the notice. A voicemail picked up. Cheerful female voice, vaguely robotic. You've reached the office of Crescent Ridge HOA. Please leave a detailed message with your parcel number and violation code. I hung up. Instead, I sent an email to the address listed on the letter, attaching PDFs of my property title, boundary survey, and a note in professional but crystal clear terms. You are mistaken. This property is not under the authority of Crescent Ridge HOA. I expect all further correspondence to cease. 2 days later, I got a reply. No apology. No clarification, just escalation. A clipped response from HOA Legal Affairs with a new PDF attachment titled Temporary Jurisdiction Notice, Hayden Lake Region. According to this legal fantasy, the Crescent Ridge HOA had entered a temporary cooperative integration agreement with the county zoning office, one that allegedly allowed them to extend limited jurisdiction over neighboring parcels to support sustainable recreational use. The kicker: they referred to my property as a rotational leisure property for board member restoration days. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or start yelling. They seriously believed they could assign days of the week to my house for their own use, like it was some kind of timeshare spa for power-tripping retirees. And apparently, Thursday was the day Karen Sharp and her merry band of HOA sociopaths wanted to restore themselves in my goddamn house. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, thinking about locks, about cameras, about lawyers, about the absolute insanity of having to defend my own cabin from a bunch of wine-drunk suburban warlords who thought paperwork was a substitute for ownership, and Thursday was coming fast. By Thursday morning, I had installed 3 motion sensor cameras, swapped out the lock for a smart deadbolt, and activated the cabin's old security system. It was primitive, basically a loud siren and some blinking red lights that made it look like a meth shack in a B-grade crime drama, but it would do. I wasn't expecting trouble. Honestly, I half hoped nothing would happen. Maybe all the HOA noise was just that. Noise. Bluff. Bureaucratic intimidation. Still, I parked my truck a quarter-mile away and hiked in on foot just in case someone was watching the driveway. I set up shop in a makeshift blind behind a thicket of fir trees with a thermos of coffee, binoculars, and a live feed from the cabin cam streaming on my phone. At exactly 11:05 in the morning, a dark blue SUV pulled up to my gate. 4 people got out. One of them, blonde Bob, posture like a plank of oak, clipboard in hand, was unmistakably Karen Sharp. She was wearing a navy blazer despite the 68-degree weather and carried herself like she was entering a government building, not someone else's property. They walked right in. No hesitation. Karen punched something into the keypad on the gatepost. I hadn't changed the code yet, stupid me, and they strolled down the gravel path like they owned the place. One of the men had a cooler in one hand and a Bluetooth speaker in the other. The third woman snapped pictures of the porch. All of them were smiling. I watched as Karen pulled a key from her purse and opened my front door. My door. They disappeared inside, and for the next 6 hours the cameras captured a scene straight out of a smug yuppie Airbnb promo. The Bluetooth speaker blasted smooth jazz and lo-fi beats. They brought in charcuterie boards, wine, pillows, yoga mats. Someone lit the fireplace despite the perfectly mild weather. They used the sauna soaked in the hot tub, and one of them even wore a robe from my linen closet. At one point, Karen stood by the window and looked out at the lake with a glass of Chardonnay in hand and said, loud enough for the mic to catch, "This is exactly the kind of atmosphere we want for board wellness. He's not even here during the week. What's the harm?" Another voice answered, "Technically, the rezoning hasn't passed yet." To which Karen replied, "Close enough. I've got the right people listening." She winked. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so hard my molars hurt. They were treating my house like a shared executive lounge, a goddamn boardroom with bathrobes. Just before they left, around 5:30, Karen pulled out her phone and took a selfie on my porch with the others, all smiles. Behind her, pinned to the front door, was a laminated flyer in pastel colors that read, "Crescent Ridge, HOA presents, Thursday Restoration Retreats, Hayden Lake Site. Tranquility by Design. Private tours available next week for board members, employees, friends. Tours. Fucking tours." After they left, I went inside, still shaking. The air smelled like lavender oil and toasted bread. My fireplace was warm. My shower was wet. There were 4 wine glasses in the sink and 1 lipstick stain on the rim of mine. On the coffee table was a small guest book, the kind you find in boutique inns. I hadn't seen it in years. My uncle used to keep it out for visiting relatives. Someone had written in it, "Lovely Thursday. The lake is so soothing. Thank you for sharing your space with the community." MF. I almost put my fist through the drywall. Instead, I went to my laptop and backed up all the camera footage, local drives, cloud, encrypted thumb drive. I wrote down every timestamp, every face, every quote. I screenshotted the flyer, the guest book, the door lock logs. The Wi-Fi network showed 4 unfamiliar devices connected during the day, all labeled Karen Sharp Phone, Crescent Pad, Wellness Speaker, Greg HOA. They were broadcasting their arrogance in Bluetooth. I filed a preliminary police report. Nothing too formal, just documentation. The deputy at the rural sheriff's office seemed sympathetic, but non-committal. "Not much we can do unless there's a break-in or damage," he said. Looks like they let themselves in. Yeah, using a key they should never have had. I was still stewing about that when it hit me. The smart lock had been remotely updated a few days ago. A software patch from the manufacturer, the same company that handled preferred service integrations for Crescent Ridge HOA. Son of a bitch. They'd added themselves as admin users. I reset the system, factory default, killed all remote access, changed Wi-Fi, swapped the router. Then I drove an hour into town and bought 2 deadbolt chains and a box of no trespassing signs. The next Thursday was going to look very different. By the following Monday, I wasn't angry anymore. I was clinical, cold. If Thursday had been a slap in the face, this was the slow drag of a scalpel across the skin. Deliberate, precise, and very, very sharp. They wanted to play games with paperwork? Fine. I'd play back. Only difference was, I came from a family of engineers, not wine club presidents. I liked rules, I liked evidence, and I wasn't afraid to crawl elbow deep into the guts of bureaucracy to cut the infection out. I started with the county zoning office. The place was a boxy concrete building tucked behind a gas station and a drive-through espresso shack, the kind of government facility where time seems to pool in the corners and nobody ever changes the light bulbs. I walked in with a flash drive, a notarized copy of my deed, a printout of my property's boundary survey, and the quiet rage of a man whose privacy had been treated like a community jacuzzi. At the front desk, a young woman with blue-dyed hair and murder-in-her-eyes customer service expression asked me what I needed. Everything, I said. Any and all documents involving Parcel 14B, Hayden Lake Region, ownership, rezoning, variance requests, cooperative land use agreements, any filings with HOA involvement. She gave me a look that said, "You sound like a lunatic," then passed me a clipboard and told me to wait. 37 minutes later, a man named Doug Lomas called my name. Mid-50s, gray buzz cut, pocket protector, and a smile like damp cardboard. We shook hands in the hallway. His ID badge read, Senior Zoning Clerk, Eastern Region. I followed him into a back room stacked wall to wall with aging filing cabinets and a single humming workstation. He tapped at a keyboard, muttering to himself, then paused. "Well," he said, "looks like there was a supplemental jurisdiction request filed last August, initiated by Crescent Ridge HOA, covers 3 parcels outside their core zone. Yours is one of them." I clenched my jaw. "Filed under what authority?" Doug shrugged. "It's not finalized, just a provisional application, pending review, but..." He squinted at the screen. "It says it includes owner consent. Let's see here. Yeah, there's a document scanned in, signed by a Gregory Hawks. My uncle." He clicked and pulled up the PDF. Grainy, low resolution, badly scanned. The signature at the bottom was barely legible, a wobbly scrawl that bore some resemblance to my uncle's name if you squinted and had a head injury. The date of the signature, 2 weeks after he died. No notary stamp, no witness signature, just a single-page agreement titled Consent to Cooperative Jurisdiction Recreational Use Program, HOA Form 9B. I leaned in. "Can I get a copy of that?" I asked, trying not to sound like I wanted to throw his monitor out the window. Doug hesitated. "You can submit a records request. Processing time's about 14 business days." "Doug," I said, my voice flat, "that's a forged signature of a dead man granting property rights to a private organization. You sure you want to be the guy who sat on it?" He blinked twice. "I'll put in an expedited request." Back at the cabin that night, I compared the forged signature to my uncle's real handwriting from an old birthday card I'd found in a drawer. It wasn't even close. The fake had loops where Greg always printed straight. It slanted upward like it was in a hurry to escape the page. It was amateur hour forgery, probably whipped up in Microsoft Paint and run through a scanner at a UPS store. And yet it was enough to get into the county system. I dug deeper. Open records, county GIS overlays, every zoning proposal Crescent Ridge had submitted in the last 18 months. Most of it was bland HOA filler, tree height restrictions, noise ordinances, some pet-related bullshit. But tucked inside one packet was a memo. Hayden Lake Integration Pilot, Phase 1. My parcel was listed. I found something else too. Metadata from the scanned document. The author field read D. Lomas. Of course it did. I sat there staring at the screen in my cabin, my breath catching in my throat as every puzzle piece snapped together. The connection was obvious now. Karen Sharp and Doug Lomas weren't just acquaintances, they were collaborators. He'd pushed her documents through, no questions asked. Probably plenty of them were fake. Mine just happened to be the one she thought she could get away with easiest. A recently inherited property, owned by a single guy with no neighbors. Wrong guy to pick, Karen. That night, I reached out to an old college friend named Val, now a GIS analyst for a utility company. Over a video call, I walked her through what I had. She agreed to help me map the discrepancies between the official zoning records and the false HOA expansion plans. If there were overlaps, illegal changes, or attempts to overwrite property boundaries, she'd find them. "I've seen this kind of thing before," she said. "Usually it's for pipelines or mineral rights. This is new, though." "What do you mean?" "Karen's not after your land, Trev. She's after your brand." "What the hell does that mean?" She sent me a screenshot, a webpage titled Crescent Ridge Community Expansion, The Future of Restorative Property Use. It featured a large banner photo of my cabin taken from the lakeside. My cabin without permission now being used as a marketing piece. It was framed with pastel borders and a stupid wellness quote in cursive font. Peace begins with community. Crescent Ridge leads the way. I didn't know whether to scream or throw up. And just below it, in a footer, funded in part by the Crescent Ridge Foundation for Residential Renewal. I clicked. It was a donation page. Karen Sharp was collecting money to improve my house. By the following Tuesday, it wasn't just paperwork. It wasn't just a few delusional HOA executives sipping Pinot Gris in my hot tub. This had become a full-blown reputational siege, and it hit me right where it hurts most in the digital age. My damn name. I woke up to 3 unread emails from my work contacts with subject lines like, "Hey, you good?" and "This about you?" each containing links to Nextdoor posts and Facebook screenshots. All of them pointed to a thread titled Illegal Rentals and Unauthorized Activity on Hayden Lake. Beware. There I was, my cabin, blurred plates on my truck, cropped, long lens photos of my deck furniture. Comments painted me as some reclusive tech bro running an unlicensed Airbnb or possible sex retreat. One woman claimed she'd seen multiple unknown men carrying cases of alcohol into the property late at night. That must have been me bringing in groceries after the co-op run. A fake account calling itself Nature Mom had posted, "This is why zoning laws matter. That man's cabin is not part of our community, and he's violating every principle of shared environmental stewardship." I recognized the language. It matched word for word with the crap I'd seen in Crescent Ridge's Phase 1 integration packet. Someone wasn't even trying to be subtle. I started poking around. Turns out Nature Mom had only ever posted about 3 things. HOA events in Crescent Ridge, a passive-aggressive campaign to ban motorized kayaks. Me. One of her other posts read, "If certain owners don't understand the value of cooperative living, perhaps it's time to reconsider private use of such a shared resource." She'd tagged it, Thursday, Harmony, Thursday, Harmony. These psychos had branded my house. Digging deeper, I found the same photos from my security footage being used in Facebook groups, photos I never shared. A few were angles I didn't even recognize. Either someone was sneaking around the property or had remote access to the security system before I locked it down. Then came the fake reviews. A listing popped up on a third-rate short-term rental site, completely bogus, featuring my cabin under the name Tranquility Lodge, Hayden's Secret. It had 4 fake 5-star reviews. Perfect Thursday escape. Loved the board-approved wine flight. The yoga deck is divine. Karen really outdid herself. This retreat changed my life. Can't wait for my next booking. Private, but still part of something bigger. The HOA community feel makes it safe and special. I nearly crushed my phone in my hand. They were fabricating a narrative, brick by brick, building a reality where my house belonged to them, to their delusion, to their wine-drenched utopia of manicured fascism. Well, if they wanted a PR war, they picked the wrong consultant. I called in every favor I had from my media and tech network. Friends from college, former clients, a guy I once helped win a zoning variance for a yurt hostel in Oregon. We launched a little side project I called Lake House Live, 1 week at the edge of sanity. I installed new cameras, this time explicitly for public streaming. No mics, just visuals. The porch, the dock, the living room, the kitchen. Everything clean, serene, blessedly boring. I built a minimalist site with live video panels and the subtitle, "See the Horrors of Unregulated Property Use," in real time. I posted a daily schedule of my activities. 7 in the morning, wake up, make coffee, stare into the lake, and question my life choices. 9 o'clock in the morning, organize screws by length. 12 o'clock in the afternoon, read Walden, sigh dramatically. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, water basil, consider existence. 6 o'clock in the evening, cook sad bachelor dinner. 9 o'clock at night, not throw orgies. The stream caught traction on Reddit and Twitter. Memes started popping up. One showed me sitting on the porch captioned, "Domestic terrorist apparently." Another had Karen's flyer over my face with the words, "Live, laugh, loot." It didn't take long. A local journalist reached out, small town media, looking for a story beyond bake sale coverage and moose sightings. I gave a quiet interview, showed her the forged documents, the zoning garbage, the donation page. She printed a front-page article titled, "Private Property or HOA Playhouse, The Battle for Hayden Lake." That lit the match. I started getting emails from other property owners, not just on the lake, from nearby counties. People with eerily similar stories, mysterious zoning notices, bizarre HOA offers to integrate their parcels. One woman claimed a committee showed up at her door with brochures and muffins, and through it all, Karen stayed silent. No direct response, no cease and desist, no lawsuit, just nothing. Which told me one thing very clearly. She was planning her next move, and whatever it was going to be big. By the time the newspaper article dropped, I was half expecting a Molotov cocktail through my window. What I got instead was far more satisfying, an inbox full of messages from total strangers with a shared expression. I think they tried this on me too. Turns out I wasn't special, just early. First came a woman named Lucinda Raines, retired professor, owned a cottage 3 miles south of me. She emailed with a PDF attached. Tell me if this looks familiar. It was a scanned copy of a cooperative jurisdiction agreement, nearly identical to the forged one tied to my uncle's name, except this one was dated 3 years ago and supposedly signed by her late husband, Walter Raines. One problem, Walter had died in April of that year. The document was dated May 3rd. When I called her, she was calm, too calm, the kind of calm people develop when they've been dismissed and gaslit for too long. I knew it was fake, she said. But every time I brought it up, they told me I must be confused. I asked if she still had any contact with the Crescent Ridge HOA. She snorted. They stopped answering my calls after I asked to see the original paperwork. Sent me a letter saying I was mistakenly placed in a pilot program, and they had no further need for my cooperation. That was a month ago. Next up was Daniel Black, a former military man, the kind of guy whose property is a sacred boundary marked with warning lights and 308 caliber warnings. He sent me doorbell cam footage of 2 HOA representatives in windbreakers showing up with a binder full of brochures offering enhanced community services if he opted into the Crescent Ridge extended plan. They'd even offered him a tax break. Lady kept talking about community cohesion, he said. I told her cohesion starts with a goddamn knock. She laughed. I didn't. He'd turned them away. But a month later, got a letter from the county claiming his lot was under temporary evaluation for integration. That was when he started installing cameras. And now, he wanted in on whatever war I was waging. That's when I realized this wasn't just my cabin anymore. This was a map, a network, and I wasn't the only dot on it. I put all the names, addresses, document dates, and digital fingerprints into a spreadsheet and color-coded it like a goddamn conspiracy theorist. Patterns emerged. Nearly all the voluntary inclusion documents were dated during off-seasons, October through March, when many owners were away. Most of the forged signatures were derived from public property records, scanned deed paperwork, or old tax forms. Several PDFs had the same scanner metadata tag, meaning they were all run through the same machine, and all of them, every single one, had a signature field either left blank or signed with something that looked like a 4th grader mimicking cursive. Then came the jackpot, an anonymous envelope, no return address. Inside, a USB stick labeled in Sharpie, "You're not crazy. B." I ran it through a sandboxed laptop just in case it was some kind of malware trap. It wasn't. Inside were folders full of PDFs, emails, scans, even audio recordings. Internal Crescent Ridge HOA meeting minutes. Private emails between Karen Sharp and Doug Lomas, referencing terms like boundary drift, retroactive consent, and posthumous provisioning. Draft letters to property owners not yet approached, with comments like, "Wait until family vacates," and "Test with new rep." Even a draft newsletter titled "Expanding Together, a New Era of Community Integration." One email thread caught my eye. Karen to Doug, "Trevor's cabin is perfect. Eco-aesthetic, single owner, emotionally unattached. He's prime for soft absorption. Make sure we have the paper trail before summer." Doug replied, "Got it. We'll prep signature files this week." Reminder, Greg Hawkes passed in May, so predate to April. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't know whether to vomit or forward the file to the FBI. I chose both, figuratively. I sent a compressed package of the most damning documents to the county sheriff's office, CC'd the local paper's editor, and included a side note for the reporter I'd already spoken to. You wanted a follow-up? Here's your Watergate. Within 24 hours, the reporter published a second article, this time with evidence, screenshots, names, a chart showing overlapping parcels targeted for pilot integration, quotes from Lucinda and Daniel. A side-by-side comparison of a real signature versus the forged one on my uncle's form. Title, Dead Men Don't Sign Forms, The Shadow Zoning Scandal of Hayden Lake. The comments section exploded. Reddit blew up again. Other small outlets picked it up. Someone on Twitter made a thread titled, How to Steal a Lake House Without Ever Buying It, a HOA thriller. The HOA's website went down for maintenance. Karen's social media profiles vanished overnight, but I knew better than to think she'd given up, because people like her don't panic. They pivot. It started with a knock. Not at my door. I disabled the cabin's doorbell after the last package from Concerned Citizens containing a Crescent Ridge welcome basket, complete with branded hand towels and a mini bottle of rosé. No, this was a knock at the HOA office. Loud, federal, and wearing a badge. Apparently, the sheriff's office had kicked things upstairs. After reviewing the forged documents, the dead signature timestamps, and especially the donation funneling through the so-called Crescent Ridge Foundation for residential renewal, they looped in the County Fraud Division, which promptly called the State Attorney General's office. On a cool Wednesday morning, a search warrant was executed. Karen's fortress of pastel-coated delusion, the Crescent Ridge HOA headquarters, was raided in full view of half the lake. Members of the board looked on in horror as agents and windbreakers carried out file boxes, hard drives, and what one witness described as a weird laminated chart with Thursday written in every square. I know this because I watched the footage from across the lake with a cup of coffee and my camera drone hovering discreetly above. Within an hour, the first leaks surfaced. The county office confirmed that multiple documents of questionable origin had been submitted by the HOA to justify temporary land use adjustments. The language was dry, bureaucratic, and designed not to start a riot. But Reddit and Twitter didn't have such limitations. One post simply read, "She made a timeshare out of your house, bro. This is a Netflix series." What they found inside the HOA office was almost too perfect. A key ring marked guest cabins, including one labeled Hawks, Thu. A printed binder titled Thursday Rotation Schedules featuring my address, Lucinda's, and 2 other lake properties under active use. A spreadsheet mapping owner attitudes with notes like compliant, requires pressure, widow soft, target, and estate in limbo. A folder of flyer designs for upcoming Wellness Showcase Thursdays, featuring photos of my house staged like it was a bed and breakfast. Copies of donation forms, with funds funneled directly into a personal account tied to Karen Sharp under the name CR Community Enrichment Reserve. Meanwhile, a separate raid occurred at the zoning clerk's office. Doug Lomas didn't even make it to lunch. They seized his work computer, his tablet, and, according to the preliminary search affidavit leaked by a gleeful local reporter, they found a manila envelope in his office cabinet marked simply Special Files. Inside, several forged owner consent forms, unsigned with dotted lines still visible, a spreadsheet titled Integration Targets 2025, and, most damning, a handwritten ledger listing cash payments, initials, and dates. One entry simply read, KS, 8, lake rotation confirmed. Back at the cabin, I felt a strange numbness as I read through the news alerts and social media reactions. There was no catharsis, no cheering moment, just a cold clinical satisfaction, like watching termites swarm out of a cracked wall you knew was rotting underneath. Karen, of course, issued a statement, through a lawyer, on letterhead that looked like it was designed in Microsoft Publisher by someone who charges hourly. Ms. Sharp maintains her innocence and asserts that all actions taken were within the bounds of community development initiatives and informal agreements with local stakeholders. Translation: we didn't think we'd get caught, but the court of public opinion wasn't buying it. The meme machines roared to life. One image showed a still of Karen from the HOA's promotional video, overlaid with the caption, "This Thursday is reserved for federal court." Another, a parody flyer with "Tranquility by Force" stamped over my house. A local podcaster invited me on his show. I declined, but listened to the episode anyway. His guest, a retired HOA board member from another state, said something that stuck with me. The mistake wasn't the power they took. It was that they started to believe they were owed it. That week, the state announced it would begin reviewing oversight policies on private HOA powers, particularly in rural and lakeside areas. Several board members resigned. Donors to Karen's foundation began filing fraud claims. Someone even spray-painted "private means private" across the Crescent Ridge community sign. As for the cabin, I installed a new gate, infrared sensors, and 2 additional cameras, one hidden in the porch light, one disguised as a birdhouse. I also changed the locks. Again, and I kept a laminated copy of Karen's Thursday schedule on my fridge. A little souvenir, the courtroom smelled like anxiety and old carpet glue. It was a small, windowless chamber in the Bonner County Courthouse. Not the kind of place that usually handled high-stakes fraud cases, but the state's backlog was a mess, and the judge wanted a public hearing. And public it was. Every bench was filled. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder in the back. Someone had brought snacks. There was even a couple in matching hoodies that read, "I survived HOA gate" in glitter vinyl. I took my place at the witness table, flanked by the county's civil attorney and a private legal rep I'd hired once things escalated past the weird lake neighbor phase. Across from me, in the defendant's row, sat Karen Sharp, draped in a beige pantsuit, like she was dressing for a sentencing in a Martha Stewart miniseries. She didn't look at me. Next to her was Doug Lomas, who looked like a man trying to disappear into his own eyebrows. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but Doug just nodded slowly, like a kid caught stealing snack cakes on security footage from 12 angles. The charges were read aloud, one by one. Criminal trespassing, forgery of legal documents, conspiracy to defraud multiple property owners, misappropriation of non-profit funds, false zoning certifications, unauthorized access and use of private property. The last one felt personal. The judge, a woman in her 60s with zero patience for theatrics, asked if they understood the charges. Karen answered for both of them with a flat, "Yes, Your Honor," as though this was all just a temporary PR hiccup on the road to her next HOA empire. The prosecution presented everything, clean and clinical. The footage from my cabin, the charcuterie, the sauna, the wine, the Thursday flyers, the forged documents, metadata showing Doug authored in backdated forms, financial records tracing donations to Karen's personal checking account under the alias CR Enrichment. They also brought in Lucinda Raines, who sat in that witness chair like a damn queen. When asked how she felt about her dead husband's signature being used to transfer partial authority of her land to strangers, she looked Karen dead in the eye and said, "If Walter could rise from the grave, he'd sue you himself." Daniel Black followed. He didn't speak much, just handed the court an audio recording of his visit from the HOA reps. The part where Karen's voice said, "This isn't coercion, it's a courtesy," got a full-body wince from her defense team. Then came me. I walked them through the whole thing. The notices, the forged signature, the fake listings, the surveillance footage, the live stream, the donations, the fake rental reviews, the guests I'd never met who left thank you notes in my own home. The prosecution showed the courtroom a screenshot of Crescent Ridge's site with my house front and center, labeled "Tranquility by Design." I clarified that I had not, in fact, designed it to be a spa day for strangers. Karen's lawyer tried to suggest I'd benefited from the exposure, that the notoriety had driven media traffic to my name and increased the public value of the property. I smiled and responded, "If that's the case, I'd like Crescent Ridge to pay the property tax increase they helped cause." The gallery laughed. The judge did not. Doug flipped first. Midway through the proceedings, his lawyer requested a deal, full cooperation, testimony against Karen. In exchange, reduced charges. The court agreed. Doug gave them everything: internal emails, instructions from Karen, exact dates of the forged files, even the chain of command they used to quietly get things slipped into county records. Karen, meanwhile, held the line until they showed her a wire transfer receipt. $8,000 moved from a Crescent Ridge Community Project Fund directly into a checking account registered to her sister 3 days after my house was first entered. That's when the mask cracked. She didn't cry. Karen Sharp wasn't the crying type, but her jaw tensed. Her pen stopped moving. She leaned toward her lawyer and whispered something that looked a lot like, "I'm not going down for this alone." But it was too late for strategy. The judge didn't allow bail. Karen and Doug were both remanded into custody pending formal sentencing. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters cornered Lucinda on the steps. Daniel vanished like smoke. I stayed back, sitting in the last pew, letting it all soak in. It wasn't over. Civil suits would follow. Property records had to be cleaned up. Donations refunded. Public statements made. But the real threat, the violation of ownership, of safety, of basic autonomy, had been dragged into the light and buried with a damn shovel. Before I left, the bailiff returned a small cardboard box with my name on it. Inside was the guest book Karen's crew had used during their Thursday restoration retreats. On the last page, written in delicate cursive, someone had scrawled, "Thank you for the sanctuary. See you next week. K.S." Under it, I added, "Not unless you're writing from prison." It took 6 months for the dust to settle. Between the state's investigation, the insurance claims, and a wave of small civil suits trickling through the courts like molasses through a busted drainpipe, life around Hayden Lake found its uneasy rhythm again. Crescent Ridge HOA was officially dissolved. Its assets, including a lakefront clubhouse, a community pontoon boat, and a terrifyingly large stockpile of branded lawn flags, were liquidated to help compensate affected property owners. I received a check for $92,000. It wasn't justice, but it was enough to install a real security system, upgrade the solar array, and finally build that cedar dock my uncle always dreamed of. The rest I put aside. I figured I might need it someday, in case the next HOA thought I looked like an easy mark. Karen Sharp was sentenced to 6 years in prison with no parole for the first 4. Fraud, conspiracy, unlawful entry, misappropriation of funds, the works. She tried to angle for house arrest, citing community leadership obligations and reputational damage. The judge responded, and I quote, "That's what happens when you turn real estate into a religion." Doug Lomas got 5 years and a lifetime ban from working in any government position. Last I heard, he was working the register at a gas station in Spokane under a fake last name. Couldn't happen to a more cooperative bureaucrat. As for me, I stayed. The cabin had been tainted for a while. Every creak in the floorboard or knock at the door made my jaw clench. But over time, that faded. Slowly, quietly, with the help of pine-scented air and long, empty mornings. I started inviting people over again. Real friends, good neighbors, not board members with wine breath and boundary issues. One Thursday in early spring, I hosted a small gathering. Just 12 of us, old college friends. 2 other property owners who'd been targeted. Lucinda brought her famous peach pie. Daniel grilled trout over open fire. Someone played soft bluegrass on a battery-powered speaker. At one point, someone pointed to the old wooden sign now hanging above my porch. I carved it myself. Thursdays by invitation only. Everyone laughed. I left the guest book out again that night, just for fun. No pressure, no fake names, no lipstick-smeared pages filled with wellness platitudes. Just real entries. At the end of the evening, I flipped through it. Lucinda wrote, "This pie tasted better than any HOA potluck." Daniel, "Nice to share a Thursday without threats." Then there was a blank page. I thought about adding something myself, but I didn't. Not that night. Instead, I went down to the dock, sat on the edge with a cold beer, and watched the moon ripple across Hayden Lake. Behind me, the cabin stood still and quiet. Solid, mine, and finally safe. Not because I had gates or cameras or legal papers taped to the door, but because everyone who thought otherwise now understood a simple truth. You don't negotiate ownership, not in court, not on paper, and definitely not on a Thursday.